Lecture 3. When an artist sets about making any work, he or she is faced with infinite choices. What kinds of lines and where should the lines go? What kind of shapes? And how many colors should be used? Somehow, the visual elements must be organized in such a way as to satisfy the artist's expressive intent. In two-dimensional art, this organization is often called composition, but the more inclusive term applicable to all kinds of art is design. Like the visual elements, the principles of design are part of the basic language of art. The task of making the decisions involved in designing a work of art would be paralyzing were it not for certain guidelines that, once understood, become almost instinctive. These guidelines are usually known as the principles of design. As we can see in this example, the visual elements such as line and shape are in and of themselves just that, a simple line and a circle. However, when we add other line and color, we start adding interest. When we vary the length and overlap them, we begin to add variety and depth. This is just one way in which to make a design with a line and circle. We can arrange them in a myriad of ways to create rhythm, balance, unity, and variety. It's through the principles of design that the artist can manipulate our emotions, direct our attention, and challenge our perception of reality. All of us have some built-in sense of what looks right or wrong, what works or doesn't. Some, including most artists, have a stronger sense of what works than others. For instance, if two families each decorate a living room, and one room is attractive, welcoming, and pulled together, while the other seems drab and uninviting, we might say that the first family has better taste. Taste is a common term that in this context describes how some people make visual selections. What we really mean by good taste, oftentimes, is that some people have a better grasp of the principles of design and how to apply them in everyday situations. The principles of design are a natural part of perception. Most of us are not conscious of them in everyday life, but artists usually are very aware of them because they have trained themselves to be aware. These principles explain systematically our sense of rightness and help to show why certain designs work better than others. For the artist, they offer guidelines for making the most effective choices. For the observer, an understanding of the principles of design gives greater insight into works of art. The principles of design most often identified are unity and variety, balance, emphasis, and focal point, rhythm, scale, and proportion. A work of art achieves unity when its parts seem necessary to the composition. Unity is a sense of oneness, of things belonging together and making up a coherent whole. Variety is different. Variety provides interest. We discuss them together because the two generally coexist in a work of art. There are many principles of design that can subtly unify a work of art. For example, Archibald Motley Jr. attains unity and variety in his painting Saturday Night by depicting a variety of captivating characters, from seated patrons to the waiters balancing their orders on tottering trays, to the curvaceous woman in the red feathered costume. Motley achieved unity in this work through color and repetition of shape. Use of color to unify a composition often revolves around repetition of a certain color theme. In Saturday Night, Motley has used a limited palette. He chooses only a few non-contrasting hues and combined them with natural whites, browns, greys, and blacks. The viewer's eye leaps from patches of black to black and from white to white, which leads our eye from the foreground through to the back. The result is coherent because nothing pulls away from the central reddish-pink color that produces a warm, energetic glow over the nightclub. His use of color also sets a certain mood, one of exhilaration, excitement, and sophistication. He creates variety by the use of shapes and pattern actively within the composition. He has repeated the curving lines of arched bodies that is seen in the man in the front who is leaning sideways in his chair. The curves are echoed in the bowed body of the dancer and the waiter and musician seen in the background. Although unity is a traditional objective in art, many contemporary artists have departed from tradition to create works that do not look or feel unified. Balance. Balance is a basic principle of art and is a visual interpretation of gravity in the artwork. Balance is dependent upon the positioning of the visual elements, lines, shapes, colors, textures. Remember those? And how they are arranged in terms of the distribution of the weight within a composition. For example, large, dense elements appear to be heavier, while smaller elements appear to be lighter, and dense, heavy tone carries more visual weight than lighter tones. An energetically drawn area likewise draws the eye more than a delicate one, and strong contrast has more impact than low contrasts. Color also has visual weight. Brightly colored objects hold more weight than pastel colors. Particularly the color red holds a lot of weight. But generally speaking, highly saturated colors or busily detailed areas will draw attention and therefore seem to carry more weight than less saturated colors or visually simpler areas. You can balance designs in 3 ways: symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, and imbalance. Let's start with symmetrical balance. With symmetrical balance, the implied center of gravity is the vertical axis, which can be viewed as an imaginary line drawn down the center of the composition. If symmetrically balanced, forms on either side of the axis, the line, correspond to one another in size, shape, and placement. Sometimes the symmetry is so perfect that the 2 sides of the composition are mirror images of one another. More often, however, the correspondence is very close but not exact. In Leonardo's drawing Proportion of the Human Figure, there is an exact correspondence between the left and right sides. When the correspondence is exact, as we see here, we refer to it as pure or formal symmetry, also known as bilateral symmetry. Symmetrical balance is achieved by placing elements in a very even fashion in the design. If you have a large, heavy element on the right side, you will have a matching heavy element on the left. Centering is the easiest way to get a symmetrically balanced composition, but it can be difficult to create a centered design that doesn't look flat or boring. If you want a symmetrically balanced design, it's better to create the balance with different elements, as is achieved in asymmetrical balance. When you stand with your feet flat on the floor and your arms at your sides, you are in symmetrical balance. However, if you stretch an arm out in one direction and a leg out in the other, your balance is asymmetrical, meaning you're not symmetrical. So therefore, an asymmetrical composition has 2 sides that do not match, but yet are balanced. For the composition to be perceived as balanced, then the visual weight in the 2 halves must be similar. Asymmetrically balanced compositions can be more challenging to design, as they do not have elements matched across the center line of the design, as we can see in this asymmetrical diagram. For example, you might have a large element placed very close to the center line of the design. To balance it asymmetrically, you might have a small element further away from the center line. If you think of your composition as being a weighing scale, as in this diagram, a lighter element can be balanced by a heavier one by being further away from the center of gravity. You can also use color or texture to balance an asymmetrical design. In Deborah Butterfield's Verdi, the horse's body dominates the overall image. Because of the elongated head of the greenish strips of steel, through which we can see the wall behind, creates asymmetry. The structure is not out of balance, however. If the neck and head of the horse were solid, then we would read the sculpture as imbalanced, that is, unevenly balanced. Asymmetrical layouts are generally more dramatic, and by intentionally ignoring balance, the designer can create tension, express movement, or convey a mood such as anger, excitement, joy, or amusement. Compositions in artwork that are imbalanced suggest motion and action. Imbalance can make people uncomfortable or uneasy. If it is the artist's intent to make the viewer uncomfortable or make people think, an imbalanced composition can work well. From 1936 to 1939, Robert Capa photographed the horrors of the Spanish Civil War. In 1936, he became known across the globe for a photo he took on the Cordoba front of a Loyalist soldier who had just been shot and was in the act of falling to his death. Because of his proximity to the victim and the timing of the photo, there was a long controversy about the genuineness of the photograph. Historians eventually succeeded in identifying the dead soldier as Federico Borel Garcia and proved it authentic. By allowing the composition to remain imbalanced or weighted on the left, Capa intensifies the moment of the death of a Loyalist soldier. We are forced to look at the falling soldier as the right side of the photograph is empty and uninteresting. Our focus returns to the man who has just been killed. Our imaginary scale is tipped to the left. Imbalanced compositions also create a sense of movement, and in Capa's photograph, the diagonal black shadow behind the soldier accentuates the downward motion.